I have any comments on the minutes?
Move
If
to
we-
accept.
Go ahead, Joe.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as written. Any further comments? All in favor, show by raising your hand. Opposed? Picture is hanging up there, right? Okay. The minutes have been approved. We'll do the same thing for the fiscal actions report. We all had a copy. Any comments on the fiscal actions report?
Move to accept.
Second.
Been moved to accept and it's been seconded. All in favor of accepting the fiscal actions report, show of hands, please. And that is also carried. Project review is the first item on the agenda. Joe, do you have a project review actions report?
Resolution 2020-28, meeting number 497. Accept project review actions report. Whereas the commission has received and reviewed the project review actions report prepared by the staff and dated 7/20/2020. Project review committee recommends acceptance of the project review actions report. Now therefore be resolved that the commission directs the project review actions report be incorporated in the minutes of the full commission meeting. So moved.
I have a question about that. I was wondering why this time the locations of those projects weren't listed, just the people. Wow.
Kathy, can you wait until I at least get the motion on the floor?
Oh, I didn't, I'm sorry.
Okay. The motion has been made and seconded. Now we're open for discussion on the motion on the project review action. Go ahead, Kathy. Sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry. I need to brush up on my parliamentary procedure rules. I was wondering why the projects did not have the location of where they occurred. They were just the names of the people, and every other one I've looked at all these years always had the location. So was there a reason for that?
Answer that. Thank you, Kathy. Good morning, everyone. You jumped ahead on the agenda a little bit, but the new report that you're voting on now was generated by our new database. So we're still working on some of the form and function of that. That'll continue to be refined, but we have reviewed it. All the information is accurate, but we have asked them to also provide the locations. So hopefully for next month, the format will be a little bit closer to what you're accustomed to.
Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Any further discussion on the motion to approve the project review actions report? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed? And the report is approved. We have no projects this month, so we have filled out the agenda with a couple of special reports. And the first one is a report on our new online permitting and database system. And that's going to be presented by Joe Thua.
Chairman, I'm going to try to share my screen here and show you a PowerPoint. Can folks see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So just a brief summary this morning on the status of our efforts to update the Commission's permit database. As general background, the Commission for several decades has retained a database that summarizes all our jurisdictional activities. So every permit that's been issued, those issuance dates, the expiration dates. So a lot of information over the last 30+ years. The database also functions to generate documents, such as our permits and notices of availability for review. And as we just mentioned, some of our reports, such as our project review actions report. The problem with the existing database is that the software that it sits on is no longer supported. So though it functions very well, if it were to crash, the Commission would be vulnerable to losing a lot of historical data. So the Commission set out the goal of developing a new database that retains the functionality of the existing one, but having that on a platform that is supported for the foreseeable future. Sounds like an easy goal. Of course, as Teddy Roosevelt said, and I'll paraphrase, anything worth doing is not easy. and trying to duplicate a custom system such as the Commission's custom database system was no easy task. The system, as we learned in trying to duplicate it, is extremely impressive, highly functional, does a lot for us. It's even more impressive because it was designed in-house. Our late friend and colleague, Keith Fish, designed this program. It was further refined and worked on by our colleague, Molly Gallagher, for many years. And it is 100% unique to the Commission. When you think about dock shapes and marine activities, what we do is unlike anything that anyone else does. So we had trouble finding a typical out-of-the-box zoning program. And similarly, to the credit of Keith and Molly, no one could duplicate the system from scratch. So certainly a hurdle there. Another issue was that the data is retained in several databases. We have a marina database, a permit database, a fee database. So getting all that into a single format was certainly a challenge. And lastly, as I indicated, we have almost 40 years worth of data. So lots and lots of information. Luckily, we found some solutions and heroes. Our solution is a company called CitizenServe. They were established in 2003. They specialize in e-government and provide a cloud-based online system. So this is an out-of-the-box system, but it's also highly customizable. And we invested a lot of time and effort doing that. From March of last year through June of this year, staff met with CitizenServe every week and helped to ensure consistency in the way that data is managed and also in the way that documents are produced. As with all good stories, this one certainly has a couple heroes. Not surprising, at the staff level, it's Molly Gallagher. You know, Molly knew this system inside and out and worked tirelessly to ensure that the new system mimics and mirrors the capability of our existing system that we've used for so many decades. The unexpected hero was Commissioner Joe Stanek. Joe, unbeknownst to many people, has an expertise in data management and commuting systems, and he must have invested hundreds, I shouldn't say invested, volunteered hundreds and hundreds of hours of his personal time. He met with CitizenServe for every meeting. He helped us coalesce all of our databases into a single unit. He helped map all the logic and source data for every database command. And really, without him, we would have had a lot of trouble getting 40 years worth of data into a modern database. So we owe him a great debt of gratitude. So thank you, Joe. With respect to the database, I'm happy to announce we met our goal. We found the replacement in CitizenServe, and we were also pleasantly surprised to see that it exceeded our expectations in several respects. And I want to go take a few minutes to talk about some of that database functionality, from data access to data security. Data access is certainly critical. That's the #1 goal. We want to retain this data for a very long time. What CitizenServe does that our prior system does not do. Are you raising your hand, Kathy?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just making it bigger so I could read the fine print.
So what
Yeah.
this system does is it provides one-stop shopping. Before, we had files and folders on the database on our server. We also had a digital database. And so when we're reviewing projects, it's not unusual to have to look in many different locations. Here's a little screenshot of a property in Putnam, and you can see the different tabs. I've tried to circle them in that red dashed line. From this one page, you can access every file, every permit, every violation, any document that's ever been generated for this parcel is all in one spot. So it coalesces all of our data into one-stop shopping. So a major efficiency. Another key element of this new system is it has an online portal for the public. So similar to staff accessing files, an individual landowner may log in to their parcel and see the files that have been generated by the system just as staff can. Another great efficiency is online applications. We've taken each of our different applications and made them fillable forms, except unlike a normal fillable form where you might type into it and then print it out or scan it, once you fill out a form for an application and hit save, it's immediately documented in the database and becomes an application simultaneously. So whereas the current system is you might download an application, fill it out by hand, mail it in with project plans, the commission receives it, stamps it, scans it, and regurgitate your information back into a database. Now that all happens seamlessly and quickly, so it'll save time and money for both the applicants and the commission. The system also provides opportunities for greater communication. The moment an applicant submits an application, such as I mentioned, they'll get an email confirmation that identifies that the application has been received. And as that status changes in the permit database, as it goes from received to under review to issued, the applicant will receive real-time updates on each of those status changes. Additionally, there's greater opportunity for communication with the public. Right now, when we have an application, we will send it out to public notice. Generally, that's done via mail. Now, if we have an email in the database, the server can automatically generate public notices to individual email addresses. So rather than us printing and mailing and losing a few days of a public comment period, people will be apprised of applications, again, in real time. Additionally, with respect to reviewing applications, right now when we mail out an application, we can't mail it out in its entirety. We do our best to provide an abridged version and a summary, but it's not an entire application. With the new system, anyone will be able to go to the portal and type in the application that they're interested in reviewing, and they can see the entirety of the record that exists as it was submitted and received. So we'll have greater communication with that respect. Lastly, for staff at the commission, this is going to assist with some workflow. Rather than dropping files on each other's desks or sending multiple emails, as an application comes in, it's automatically tracked and maybe assigned to different reviewers and staff members, so that way we can track things along the way. And lastly, just like the current system, the system can generate documents such as permits and notices, and actually many more than currently exist with the current database. Certainly an improvement with that respect. Another unexpected benefit is mobility. So this is a cloud-based service. So wherever there's internet service, there's access to this database. So whether you're a landowner or a contractor in the field or a staff member, if you have internet access, you can get on to the server and you can see any permits, any plans that might be related to a project. Similarly, data can be uploaded from the field. A current field visit might involve taking pictures with a camera or phone, coming back to the office, downloading those, uploading them to the server. With the new system, you can take a picture with your smartphone and it uploads directly to the subject property, thereby saving some post-processing time at the office. Lastly, and importantly, is data security. As opposed to filing cabinets in an office or a server sitting in the commission office, the CitizenServe program provides a robust digital backup. It has multiple separate server sites, cloud duplicated data, and that backup system is further backed up by Iron Mountain, which is a data management and recovery company that services thousands of companies all over the world. And so even the backup has a backup, which Commissioner Stanek found impressive. And when Joe Stanek is comfortable with something, then the rest of us can certainly be at ease as well. So moving forward, again, happy to announce we have a database that replaces the old one that can maintain and generate data for the foreseeable future. The system is working. We brought it online in early June with respect to all documents, including the project review actions report. We will continue to refine processes and documents, but the system is fully functional. We will have public access coming out in the coming weeks, so folks can make their applications online and share documents that way. That will be seamlessly incorporated into the commission webpage, so keep an eye out for that. And lastly, just a thank you to all the board for their support for this important project, to the staff, both past and present, setting the bar for what a database can and should do, and for everyone in the office today who helped bring this to fruition. This was really a group effort by everybody on staff. And lastly, a special thanks to Joe Stanek. Without his expertise, skill, and overwhelming amount of time he volunteered, we certainly wouldn't be rolling this out today. So thank you again. And with that, I will turn it back over to the chairman.
Thank you, Joe. And on behalf of the commission, I want to say thank you for all the effort to you and staff in this, and especially to our own Commissioner, Joe Stanek. Joe, you stepped up way above and beyond to volunteer your time for this, and we truly appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is the after 2 years of bombarding Albany, we finally have permission to go public with the stormwater regulations, and we have a presentation this morning, long awaited, by Mr. Dave Wick. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I was gonna see if we could back up just a little bit and bring it to Mr. Parker for some background. So Ken, the chairman had designated a stormwater committee, and Ken Parker was the chair of that. Ken, I didn't know if you wanted to provide a little bit of background before we jump into it.
A little bit of background that I can provide is that it's been going on for so long that you forget some of the things we had to do to get it done. And then as we got it done, we just ran into some holdups that we hadn't predicted. One of the normal commission processes is that when we make these type of, I use the word major changes, and they're not major changes, but the whole situation's major. Our goal has always been, because we're required to have public input, and we also want public input. We like to do that when we are in our high season, so to speak, so that the commission is known for an era of transparency. We don't have January meetings inviting homeowners from New Jersey, Connecticut, and California and expecting them to come testify, offer testimony. So with that having said, I'm going to go back to David because he lives with us 25 hours a day. As we all know, that's the minimum number of hours in his day because he works so darn hard. We're to a point now where I think that it's going to be successful because our initial work we did was communicating with all of our interested partners, including all the municipalities and anybody from the public who wanted input. And that was the basis for the improved changes that we made, because remember, we tackled this a number of years ago, and some of us still have scars from those meetings up in Bolton, trying to change the ruling. So David, you can pick me up from there.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So this is informational for folks that are online. It may be a little deja vu for some of you that were around for a couple years ago. I'm going to ask Carla and Joe to jump in at any given point if I miss something or misspeak or whatever it might be. And also, this is intended to be pretty informal. This is a public information meeting, including kind of rebriefing our commissioners on where we are. And if you have any questions at any time, just unmute yourself and kind of join into the process. So let's see if I can kind of get this going here. Broadcast, start broadcast. All right, 1 second. Okay, so can you guys, whoever's unmuted, let me know if you can see the screen?
Yep, looks good, Dave.
Great, okay. So a little bit of background. This is our July 28th public information meeting. This doesn't qualify as a public hearing. At the end, I might ask Carla to kind of brief us on kind of the legal aspects of where we are in the overall formal process, but a nice overview of the South Basin here, courtesy of Carl Heilman. You can see the English Brook Delta down low. We'll talk about that in a second, but in general, we want to talk about stormwater runoff and water quality. Stormwater runoff is noted and has been noted since the early 1980s as by far the largest impact to the water quality of Lake George. Generally, this is what you're looking at here. This isn't far from my house, actually a little across the street. And in any typical rainstorm event, this is kind of what we see, an upland development with a road that's not well designed. And we see quite a bit of sediment runoff coming down the road. And ultimately, part of this can end up in Lake George. So what does this carry that's problematic? The pollutants, phosphorus, nitrogen, sediment, chlorides, and others ultimately can impact Lake George negatively for the long term. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So if you swim in Lake George, especially if you've been here, I believe the chairman's been on Lake George for more than 50 years. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is more and more of these benthic algae increases that are indicative of kind of an outside pollution source that are accelerating some of the eutrophication of Lake George. Lake George is notable for having some of the finest water quality anywhere in the country for a large lake. And what we're seeing is a bit of decline here and there, and not a pronounced a decline, some might say, but it's a long-term trend that we're really taking a look at. And we go out there and do quite a few swims to check on the quality of the milfoil work out there in Lake George. And I've been swimming in Lake George on and off for about 30 years. And this is more common of a site than it used to be. And it tends to be more concentrated in developed areas for some of the reasons that we're going to talk about. Some of what people get to see, actually, if you're not a snorkeler, is on the visible side. This is the English Brook Delta. Back when I was at Soil and Water, I used to do presentations quite often about erosion and sediment control. And this is something that we used to keep track of, the English Brook Delta. It actually started, you can't see this in the 1948 aerial photo. You can see it in the 1966 aerial photo. And that corresponded directly to the construction of the Adirondack Northway and development within the north side of the Lake George Village. This delta right now exceeds 70,000 cubic yards of material that really doesn't belong in Lake George due to accelerated sedimentation. And that sediment also carries different pollutants in the lake that can degrade the water quality. So the science behind kind of where we are with Lake George water quality has been long-standing. Started really with the National Urban Runoff Program back in 1983 by Dr. Jim Sutherland, Randy Hyatt, and a few others, that really noted that stormwater runoff is the largest impact to Lake George. This is part of a national program. Lake George was fortunate enough, along with Arundecoit Bay up by Rochester, to be the two study sites in New York State. And it was really the first time it was documented that we're seeing some minor water quality declines due to stormwater runoff. This was followed up by the plan for the future of the Lake George Park, which really was a defining document. It was the first watershed management plan for Lake George. Most of those recommendations, or a lot of them, dealt with upland development and stormwater runoff. Then we had the Stearns and Wheeler Phosphorus Budget Report in 2001 that was commissioned by the Park Commission. And most importantly, the 30-year study, as we call it, now a 40-year study from Barron Freshwater Institute that took a look at the long-term water quality trends of Lake George. And one of the notable outcomes was that in 30 years, they're seeing a slight decline in the overall water quality, water clarity. And if you figure Lake George has been around for about 13 to 14,000 years since the last glaciation, having this level of decline only over the last several decades is pretty concerning. And we're also seeing the chlorophyll, basically a signature of algae, increasing even more so over the past 30 years. And all these things are a bit telling and concerning for the long term of, future of the quality of Lake George. You might remember a few years back, Governor Cuomo came out pretty strongly to talk about the greatly concerning increase in harmful algae blooms, or cyanobacteria blooms, in New York State's lakes. And I'm going to show you a map pretty soon. One of the lakes out of the 12 that he designated was Lake George. We're the only lake out of those 12 that hadn't seen, or has not yet seen, thankfully, a harmful algae bloom or a cyanobacteria bloom, because those blooms can lead to toxic chemicals that are discharged from those cyanobacteria, causing problems certainly with drinking water. And you might hear of where dogs have drank this type of water and had problems with their liver or even passed away. And what we heard early on was, well, it's just the smaller, shallow, warmer lakes that are really experiencing these concerns, but it's really kind of expanded beyond that. So Skaneateles Lake is out in the Finger Lakes area, and it is basically what we call the sister lake to Lake George. It is the only other water body in New York State near to our size that has similar water quality. And back in the summer of 2018, this is what they saw. They had two fairly large-scale harmful algae blooms. So if you take a look down here, the left-hand side, this is on Skaneateles Lake.
The following segment is sponsored by the Times Union.
And I have no idea what that is. But this is what we're seeing. We went from essentially 30-foot water clarity in Skaneateles Lake down to about 2 inches. And over time, these blooms do go away, but they have repeated themselves afterwards. And ultimately, this is a map I took from the DEC website last year doing a presentation. Each of these dots represents a cyanobacteria or harmful algae bloom in Lake George, in one of the lakes around New York State. So the gray dots indicate a harmful algae bloom that had appeared at some point in the summertime, and the yellow dots were harmful algae blooms that had appeared just in the past 2 weeks. So you can see quite a few around the area here of Cayuga Lake, which has a lot of problems. But you can see that they've been popping up all around New York State. Now, if you look at this map from 10 to 12 years ago, there's only 2 to 4 lakes in New York State that have harmful algae blooms. We're seeing an exponential rise in harmful algae blooms across New York State, which prompted the governor really to take a harder look at what's happening out there. And one of the overall outcomes was, yes, it's development within these watersheds that is during rainstorm events and snowmelt events, bringing excess nutrients to those water bodies. And at some point, there's a tipping point that is reached, and those lakes ultimately end up seeing these harmful algae blooms, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to jump over to stormwater management in general. And one of the reasons that the commission was created back in 1987, based on the regulations that were adopted at the time, was very clearly stormwater, to make sure that the development within the Lake George Park was done in such a way as to try to protect the water quality of Lake George for the future. So the commission established the original stormwater regulations back in 1990, and then updated those in 1997, 1998. And the idea being that anybody that's undertaking development within the Lake George Park do their best under certain guidelines to try to capture and infiltrate the stormwater on that property. But in that same time frame, the commission realized, as did everybody, that it's not simply private development that's causing the runoff to Lake George. It's also public lands. It's what we see here is Beach Road and Route 9 and the Northway, and all the public infrastructure that also goes into Lake George. And so over the period of many years, working together, the Park Commission, Lake George Association, Fund for Lake George, certainly Warren County Soil and Water, working with funding from Department of Environmental Conservation and Department of State, so far putting over $10 million into public infrastructure projects solely for the purpose of reducing the amount of stormwater runoff that's going directly to Lake George. The picture on the right is a project that I did when I was back at Soil and Water. This is cutting edge construction. The idea was over here on the right hand side is the village's Beach Road parking lot. We took all of that stormwater and we ended up doing a large infiltration gallery. And then if you run along Beach Road right now, that is overlain by some very nice landscaping that the village crews did. So the idea is fairly simplistic, which is take the water that's right now directly discharging to Lake George and get it back in the ground where the soil can act to adsorb the phosphorus that is one of the leading causes of decreased water quality in Lake George, and also nitrogen and sediments. So a lot of this funding has been put in place, and a lot of public projects have been forwarded to advance the reduction of stormwater into Lake George itself. The commission also worked with the municipalities around Lake George with some funding and some grants back in the day to take a look and evaluate individually, town by town, what public infrastructure could be addressed to minimize the impacts to Lake George. Those assessments are all on the Warren County Soil and Water site, and I believe maybe on the Park Commission site as well, identifying very specifically what projects can be done to improve the runoff condition going into Lake George from public infrastructure. Many of those projects have been accomplished to date. So on the on the public side, work continues, and work is going to continue into the future to help ensure that the public infrastructure is minimally impacting as possible. On the private side are the stormwater regulations that help regulate development within the Lake George Park to try to minimize impacts from those developments on the overall water quality of Lake George. So again, the stormwater regulations were enacted in 1990. They were updated in 1998. And what we've seen over time is, the water quality and clarity does or has continued to decline slightly in some of these areas, most notably in some of the shallower bays. And so we wanted to take a look at what we can possibly do to help improve the situation out there within the watershed. So I wanted to jump to what are the existing provisions of the Lake George Park Commission regulations. So if you're going to be doing a development project in the Lake George watershed, this is what you need to comply with when you are doing land disturbance within the park. So anytime you disturb land between 5,000 square feet and 15,000 square feet, or a new 1,000 square feet of impervious, that constitutes what we call a minor stormwater permit. So you need to do erosion and sediment control, and you need to accommodate the infiltration of basically 1.5 gallons per square foot of impervious area. It equals out to about a 2.5-inch rainstorm. So it's a good amount of water that we're looking to have homeowners that are developing property get infiltrated back into the ground. The next level up is a major project, and that is 15,000 square feet of disturbance or more. And that that type of project will generally constitute a little bit more work, taking a look at the different storm events and running HydroCAD and making sure that the stormwater systems are well designed, because they're generally larger projects. The goal itself has always been, from the inception of the Park Commission and its regulations, no new net discharge from development, and infiltrate where possible. We have the great benefit in Lake George of having very good soils, infiltratable soils, with the possible exception of up north in the Ticonderoga area. So we have the ability to take the precipitation coming out of the sky, and even if you're developing on your property, get that water back into the ground like it would under an undeveloped condition. And I think we've been pretty successful in many cases in doing so, and we're going to talk about that. But when we took a look and said, are we doing enough, and taking a look at the regulations that were originally promulgated back in 1990 and reviewed in 1998, that was 23 years ago. And since that time, we're still seeing some long-term declines. So the commission got together. The chairman appointed Ken Parker as the chairman of the Stormwater Committee. We said, let's sit and meet with all the towns around Lake George, meet with the planning boards, the town boards, the zoning boards, and also a number of stakeholder groups to say, here's what we're seeing based on the science. Here's what the commission regulations are to date. How do we do a little bit better? And we find that balance between what development needs are within the basin for people that want to develop their properties, and trying to protect Lake George from undue stormwater and sedimentation impacts. So we had over 30 meetings with every municipality around the basin and these stakeholder groups, and talked about different ideas. What can we do? Where are we with the status of our current regulations? And very positive feedback from everybody. And what that helped us do is craft a set of ideas that we came out with in 2018 that we talked about previously, that we're going to talk about again, and see if we can put these things in place that find a balance between private property rights and development potential and environmental protection of the lake. And that's what we're going to talk about. So where we are today, that was a lot of background, I apologize, but I think it's important to talk to people about where we are, and the fact that this is a kind of all hands on deck situation between public and private properties, between private landowners and municipalities. So for the first time, we conducted a full evaluation of our regulations, and we're still seeing a slow decline in Lake George. And can we find reasonable ways to help slow that decline or even mitigate that decline? So what we looked at are two things: stormwater regulations themselves, and how do we make the current program we have better? And that includes looking at timber harvesting, retrofitting of existing properties, setbacks for stormwater we'll talk about, and also fertilizer restrictions that are currently in place in 2 towns within the watershed. We also are going to be looking at stream corridor regulations, which are currently placed at 35 proposed stream stream buffers, and also stream crossing standards, culverts, and the like. So if you remember back in the day, if you were engaged, we had stream buffers as a part of the stormwater regulations. Since that time, and one of the reasons it's taken us a while to get where we are, is it was contested really by folks at DEC and APA, and I believe rightfully so, to say, listen, if you're going to be doing stream corridors or stream buffers, why don't you backfill the need, which is in Article 43 of the Lake George law that says the commission shall implement stream corridor regulations holistically. So they said, what you're doing is good, just do it under a different section of law. So that's what we're doing. And in doing so, we had to parse out two separate sets of regulations. One would be stormwater. The second would be stream corridor regulations. In doing so, that restarted the clock on one of the things that we're doing, which is stream corridor. So we've had approval through Albany, the governor's office, to release the actual regulations and all of the SAPA documents, the regulatory impact statement, and all the supporting information. That's all on our website and has been since last week. Stream corridor regulations are still under review, and we hope for that review to be expedited because we do want to do these things in parallel if possible. So while we can't release currently the stream corridor regulations, we can discuss in great detail what we're proposing to do, which really mirrors what the regulations are. So I'm going to jump into each of these specifically and give you a little bit better idea of where we are. So in terms of timber harvesting, we'll start with this one. Logging within the Lake George Park really has been regulated since the commission adopted its stormwater regulations back in 1990. The problem with it is the regulation is not well known or followed. Back in the day, back in the late 1990s, I was approached by the then executive director of the Park Commission, Mike White, to say, let's see if we can try to do a little bit better. Can the Office of Soil and Water take a look at some of the logging jobs around Lake George Park and provide some guidance to the municipalities and to the commission? So Soil and Water started doing that. The problem is there's a disconnect between loggers knowing to go to Soil and Water and getting a review in the municipalities. And it's been a bit of a challenge all along to really have a general handle on what's happening out there for logging activities in the park. A lot of times you'll see land clearing in advance of a development project. It could be upwards of an acre, 2 acres. And no one would be the wiser as to whether that was a logging job per se or a development job. Logging standards have always had a lighter workload to ultimately get approval to move forward. Essentially, they're not required to do most of the tenets of traditional stormwater management under the Commission's stormwater program. It's primarily erosion and sediment control. So what we attempted to do through this effort is try to bring it kind of full scale, bring the authority for review, at least the notice of intent of logging in Lake George Park, back to the Park Commission or those municipalities that are designated to administer our regulations, which are Queensbury, Lake George, and the town of Bolton. And it seems to make sense. So we had many discussions with the forestry folks around the Lake George Park and talked about it. And this has, I think, been a pretty good compromise where we're looking for identifying what logging activities are going on in the Lake George Park and just seeing that they have proper erosion and sediment controls. And so two benefits. One is that we know that a logger or a forester or a landowner has really taken a look at what they're looking to do out there in the watershed. We don't end up with situations like you see here on the bottom, which is a logging job that's clearly just bled down the side of the hill in the town of Hague, completely filled up a roadside ditch, and then all this flowed directly to Lake George, resulting in a large fine and penalty. Nobody wants to get to that stage. So we wanted to just see what's going on in Lake George Park and take a look to make sure they have erosion sediment control going on. And also this helps segregate for us to know that a land clearing in any part of the park is actually a logging job and not a development job that has moved forward without the proper stormwater permit. So to get to where we are, one of the first ideas said, well, there isn't even a synonymous form for people to fill out to let you know what's going on. So working with the forestry community, we identified generally the needs of kind of seeing where things are happening out there. So we have a new notice of intent, a soil conservation plan form that basically says, I'm the landowner or I'm the logger and I'm going to be working here. They're required to give 2 weeks notice in advance just so the commission can take a look at it. And then provide essentially a cursory overview of where they're going to be working and the fact that they're going to be providing for erosion and sediment controls, which are water bars, turnouts, stabilization post-harvest. They're not required to do stormwater infiltration, run hydrocad models, anything else that is a component of a traditional land disturbance project in Lake George Park. So they're exempt from the majority of the stormwater provisions that the Park Commission has, but it still allows the commission to understand what's happening out there in the park. So we think this is a good step forward, and we see it as something that will be beneficial not only to Lake George and the Park Commission's understanding of what's happening out there with logging jobs, but also to provide some sense of security that if somebody's undertaking a logging job, fill out this form, submit it to the commission or that designated municipality, certainly have a handle on the project that you're going to be working on, and off you go to do the job. There's no fee for this application or notice. You just submit it, and we move forward from there. So that's kind of an overview of what we're looking at for logging, and we can talk about that at any level of detail that the commissioners wish. So we're going to move to number 2, which is retrofitting, making it better. So I believe this is one of the most important things that we're looking at in the new stormwater regulations update. So taking a look at where we are in the Lake George watershed is many of the developable properties in the Lake George watershed have already been developed. The Lake George Association did an excellent data atlas that kind of identified all the parcels in the park, which ones have been developed, about what year they'd been developed, those types of things. Much of the park had been developed prior to the Commission's stormwater regulations, which means there was no requirement that anybody that had built a house within the Lake George Park have any stormwater improvements to those properties. So anybody that developed before 1990, which is the vast majority in the Lake George Park, really did not have to do anything in terms of keeping that stormwater on their property. So, and that has also helped lead to long-term slow decline also within the Lake George basin itself. So this idea essentially says we're not changing the thresholds for a land disturbance project or a development project to require a permit. Those will remain the same. 5,000 square feet constitutes a minor project, 15,000 square feet constitutes a major. Currently, any project that is undertaken in the Lake George basin that exceeds 15,000 square feet of land disturbance is required to address stormwater not only from that new portion of development, but also the rest of the developed portion of the property. That has been in place since the 1990s. So if it's a larger project, that's a requirement. Most of the development projects that happen within the Lake George basin are minor projects. They're between 5,000 square feet and 15,000 square feet of land disturbance. So this is a perfect example, the picture on the top right. Here's a typical project in the Lake George basin where an existing property is looking to add on a new sunroom or a one-car garage or whatever else it might be, requiring a minor stormwater permit. Under the current situation, only the stormwater from that newly constructed area would require a stormwater permit, while the rest of the development on that property would simply continue on. And if it flows off site into the roadside ditch down into Lake George, that's what's currently been happening. What we're looking to do with this provision is apply the same provisions that are in a major, which are if you're looking to do a development project that triggers a stormwater permit, take a look at the stormwater on the rest of the developed part of that project, of that property, and do the best you can to try to get that stormwater infiltrated on site. Now, it's important to note that there is a lesser standard for the existing site than there is for the proposed. So for the proposed, you're looking at essentially what equates down to addressing stormwater from 2.5 inches of rainfall onto that newly developed site. With the retrofit portion, we're looking at a minimum of 1/2 inch. So it's about 20% of the volume of the newly developed site as a minimum. We're looking to have the entire site to the maximum extent practical, which means if you can get 1 inch, 1.5 inches, 2 inches by simply increasing the size of a berm on the property so the stormwater doesn't flow down to the road and get in the roadside ditch, then we're hoping that you're going to do that. So that's what we're kind of looking at as the general idea behind retrofitting. Now, looking at this, and we've worked on this back and forth with town supervisors, code enforcement officers, the engineering design community, just to see how these things can work. And one of the things that came up a couple of times is what happens if you were, say, up in the town of Putnam, where this project is right here, and you've basically developed on a very small rocky site, and there's very little ability to address stormwater on the whole property, let alone that newly developed portion of the site. And there were some concerns that, boy, you know, if we're looking to do this small project, all of a sudden we're into a 3 or 4 month approval process by going in front of the commission or that municipal body just to get a variance to say, all right, I can't do that minimum ½ inch. It's bedrock. I don't have enough site to do it. It's simply impossible. And do they need to go through that multi-month review process? And our board took a look at it and said, no, we're comfortable letting the staff decide that, provide a waiver from that requirement that the minimum of ½ inch from the existing development will need to be addressed as well. So we met with the code enforcement officers and they said, yeah, we have that approval authority. We can get that approval authority from the towns. Our chairman has said, yes, I believe this is something that we can certainly take into effect and have the project reviewer, either Joe Thune or myself, say, nope, this is a very difficult site to address. And you need to address the stormwater from the new development. But if you physically can't address the existing development, here's a waiver to do so. So that's one of the things that we've looked at. I mentioned, if you read the article in the paper on the Post-Star, that this is one of the most important things, I think, over the long term for Lake George. It's not going to change the trends of Lake George in a year, even 5 years or so. But as people retrofit their properties, as they build and replace properties, over time, more and more of these properties will become what we call stormwater neutral, which is there's a development that's been out. This is the Hewlett's Landing up in the lovely town of Dresden. Many of these properties were developed prior to 1990. As these camps are replaced or they're expanded upon, if those camps right now have no stormwater controls, over time, as those properties are redeveloped, they will have the proper stormwater controls to minimize new impacts to Lake George from stormwater runoff. So we think it's important for the long term. Okay, jumping into number 3. This whole project wasn't about taking a look and seeing how we can tighten everything out there, every restriction, and simply move in that direction. It was how do we do better overall for projects? And in meeting with the design community, they said one of the challenges that we have is we have a 100-foot setback for stormwater infiltration devices, and that makes it very difficult to do stormwater when you can build a house in some areas as close as 50 feet to the water body. So pumping of stormwater is not allowed, and generally most of the grades drain towards the lake on most of these properties. And they were doing all sorts of gyrations to try to figure out how to best fit stormwater systems back up 100 feet away from the water body, when we could identify no real science that said there was a significant difference in water quality between an infiltration project 35 feet setback and one that's 100 feet setback. So taking a look and again trying to balance the risk versus the reward, a lot of the design community said we can do better stormwater projects if we have this area to work. And also it avoids the challenge of them having to go for a variance from the 100-foot setback to a water body, because it's difficult to prove sometimes to get a variance for these things. So it was an administrative challenge. And this is something that our commission thought, well, with a lessening of the current regulations, we can actually gain better projects out there within the basin. In meeting with the code enforcement officers and town supervisors around the basin, they thought this would be a good step forward to help produce better stormwater projects out there and allow a lot more flexibility for homeowners and their designers to meet the standards in a way that makes sense for Lake George. Okay, so fertilizer restrictions is number 4. This is something that the commission has been looking at for a number of years. If you've been following the commission for several years, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were presented with a petition, several hundred signatures that said, you know what, you really need to start to take a look at fertilizer applications in the Lake George watershed. You know, the towns of Queensbury and Lake George are taking a look at this, and it's really important. The whole idea is that fertilizers, by their very nature, are meant to feed plants, and whether that is a plant upland or whether that is a plant in the water, essentially, algae, it does the same thing. And by minimizing your applications directly adjacent to water bodies and wetlands, it's a fairly straightforward step to try to address some of these impacts directly to Lake George. Town of Queensbury passed this exact regulation, local law in 2011, Town of Lake George in 2014. So we reached out to those folks. We talked to Craig Brown from Queensberry. We talked to Dan Baruch from the Town of Lake George and said, you know, what do you think? Is this a challenge to enforce, to identify these issues? And, you know, how do you think it's working in your towns? And so I don't want to speak for those individuals, but I think the general tenor was, you know, it can be difficult to find out exactly if one individual landowner is spreading lawn lime or he's spreading fertilizer out there adjacent to a water body. But in many cases, the more important impact is, as we see up here in the top, a commercial lawn applicator, of course, ethically and legally, has to follow all local laws. And if you see a chem lawn company out there, you know, out there spreading fertilizer within X distance of the lake, that can be really problematic for them. So they were seeing what they believe as a fairly high compliance rate among the commercial applicators, and they're hoping for voluntary compliance minimum. And also, you know, we've seen some neighbors come back and say we're concerned that our neighbors seem to be spreading fertilizer out there. Can you come take a look? Those towns have done so. So this is what we're looking to do, is essentially take the Queensberry and Lake George laws and apply those Lake George basin wide. So that is in the stormwater provisions section. So we have 4 things that we're kind of looking at. They mirror what we talked about before. There's really been no change in what we talked about from 2018 to today. The change is that we had to segregate out our stream buffer provisions into our stormwater, or I'm sorry, our stream corridor protection portion of the Lake George law. And what we're looking at doing, however, is the same thing as we talked about 2 years ago. And I'm going to take you through this a little bit right now. So stream buffers, what are they? They're essentially a vegetated corridor on either side of a stream. They have multiple benefits, filtering stormwater pollutants.
Yeah. No, so I,
Did we lose David?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I'm trying
so.
to figure out where he went.
Dave, right at the end of his presentation.
You got tired.
Footsteps in a door. This is like old time silent radio. I know. I guess we didn't ever have silent radio, did we? Old time radio shows. Justin, are you on the job there looking for him?
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Well, what he said, what he's been saying is very important. And
Looks like we lost Justin too.
yeah, Justin's lost too.
Are they both at the office? I wonder if something
Mm.
happened at the office.
Anybody got any deck of cards?
yeah. Well,
Can anybody call them? Either of them? Oh, here we are.
Yeah, they're just having some technical difficulties. They'll be back on in about 30 seconds.
All right.
There we go.
All right, Dave, I got to make you co-host again.
Okay. Sorry about the problems, folks.
There you go.
Don't worry, Dave. We were all amusing ourselves here.
Was that Pat?
Looks
I appreciate that, Pat. All right. I'm current. Okay, so did we lose me right around the science part of it?
No, right after.
The
you
beginning of
mentioned
it.
stream buffers.
Okay.
Slide up.
Right about here?
Yes.
That was it, right there.
All right, good. So sorry about that, guys. Our Wi-Fi sometimes here is a little spotty, especially in rainstorms for some reason. So yeah, thanks for calling, Justin. All right, so going back to where we were, balancing property rights versus the needs of Lake George. We had multiple discussions. I don't know if you heard that, that the commission did have the authority ultimately to put in place those regulations back in the day, but the commission chose not to based on the public's concerns over, potential overreach. Is that 100 feet truly necessary to protect Lake George, or can we do maybe not as well from an environmental standpoint, but find that balance a little bit better? And that's really what the commission took to heart in this new review. We took a look at every piece of scientific literature that we could find that was relevant to a Lake George type situation. And what we found through many months of research is we do think we can find perhaps a better balance. And many of the studies had indicated that we can still see a fairly significant phosphorus and sediment and nitrogen removal from lesser width buffers within the Lake George watershed. We have multiple benefits, one of which is we have fairly highly infiltratable soils. And we also have areas that on many areas are simply not overly developed. So a lot of the studies take a look at agricultural areas or more intensely developed properties around urban corridors. So we started to take a look at some of these factors and say, if we're able to reduce a stream buffer from the originally proposed 100 feet down to something less, where is that balance? And taking a look at some of the science and some of the curves, we were seeing that we can see a fairly significant reduction in total phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment within a range of anywhere between 25 and 50 feet. And so we took a look at that and ultimately decided that having a stream buffer that was 35 feet seemed to kind of meet the test within the Lake George watershed. It was similar to the existing cutting restrictions and shoreline setbacks. It really seemed to meet where the nutrient reduction goals were at, anywhere between 50 and 75% nutrient reduction in many cases, and balances off the property rights concerns of many people saying, boy, 100 feet on either side of the stream is fairly significant. So what the commission is currently proposing is a 35-foot stream buffer that has a few provisions specifically set into it, fairly similar to the shoreline setbacks that the Adirondack Park Agency has for shorelines in the Adirondack Park. So I'll take you through this, and Joe, jump in if I miss something or if I misspeak. So first of all, most importantly, one of the concerns, because I was around for all the hearings back in the day as well, one of the concerns was what constitutes a stream? How do I know if it is a regulated stream or not a regulated stream? The commission has taken that cleanly off the table. Right now, the stream, a stream in Lake George watershed is identified very specifically as DEC regulated streams only. And those streams are very easy to find in the Environmental Resource Mapper, which is a public document that's on the DEC website. It's very clear. Every town knows exactly what those streams are. Certainly the Park Commission knows what they are, and they're very easy to understand. Is it the entirety of the stream network in the Lake George Park? It is absolutely not the entirety of the stream network in the park. It is a lesser subset of that, which is one of the drawbacks that some conservation and environmental folks were concerned with, which is we're probably eliminating a fair amount of streams within the park. But we do believe that moving forward in this direction provides a very good first start at taking a look at stream buffers within Lake George Park, because the DEC regulated streams, I do believe, constitute a good majority of the streams in the park, and they also ultimately carry the vast majority of the water. So that's what we're looking at up front, and I just want to be very clear, DEC regulated streams only. So we have the buffers themselves divided out into two sections, essentially. Within the first 6 feet of shore, no vegetation may be removed, except that a contiguous clear-cut opening may be created. So what you're looking at is basically no cutting within that 6 feet, except you can have a 30% open cut for access to the stream. That can be a maximum of 75 linear feet, or 30% of the stream length, whichever is less. So that's the first 6 feet. Now between 6 feet and 35 feet, no woody vegetation greater than 1 inch in diameter above what we call diameter breast height, or 4.5 feet, or chest level, may be removed, except for what we noted above, that 30-foot contiguous clear cut. So in meeting with folks out there saying, well, you know, we have a whole bunch of underbrush and vegetation we'd like to remove just to kind of clean up that corridor a little bit. And that made some sense. But taking a look at the science in some detail and talking with DEC, APA, and the governor's office, I said, well, you know, if you're clearing all the underbrush out of that stream corridor, that really doesn't constitute the stream buffers as really represented in much of the science. So we think we found hopefully a middle ground that works for people, where underbrush under 1 inch, you know, certainly the smaller, weedier vegetation can be removed. Just anything over 1 inch, or essentially a tree, small tree, would have to remain within that area. So the second part is what can be put in that buffer from a construction standpoint. And what we have are standards where 100 square feet of new impervious structure, or 400 square feet of impervious hardscape, which is a stone patio, porous paver, lawn deck, those types of things. So that is what can be constructed within the stream buffer on a project site. So the next thing is pretty important. So I'll read it to make sure I get it right. Where development exists within a designated stream corridor prior to the effective date, these areas are considered an aggregate with any proposed development or land clearing, such that the total development within a designated corridor complies with the standards above. So basically, if you have an area where the stream corridor does not exist, your stream buffer does not exist, you will be allowed to keep that open cut in perpetuity. Towards that same end, if you have a portion of that area, let's say you have 20% of that 100 feet of your shoreline frontage to a DEC stream currently cut, and you want to expand it to 40 feet, you will not be able to cut that full amount. You can go to the maximum standard, which is a 30% maximum open clearing to that stream. And also, there is no standard saying that if you have 50%, 80% of that stream corridor already cleared, that the commission is going to be requiring you to revegetate that over any amount of time. So I believe that is the current standard right now, and there's going to be some questions on that, but it would benefit folks to take a look at these two slides. They are on our website, and read through it, understand it a little bit more, and then we're always available to answer questions. Okay, I'd already identified what is a stream, but this is the DEC website. If you just go on to DEC onto the website, just type in environmental resource mapper, and you'll come up with New York State showing all the streams, just zoned into Lake George, and it's very easy to identify where your property is and where a stream might be. If it doesn't exist on that property, then that is not a designated stream by DEC. So at the end of the day, is this reasonable? Is this a balance? Is it going to please everybody that is interested in having larger buffers? Absolutely not. Is it going to please the folks that think that buffers have no value to Lake George or its streams? No, it's not. But our commissioners unanimously 2 years ago said we find, based on the science and the research and our outreach with municipalities and all of the stakeholder groups, this represents a good compromise to get some stream corridor protections within the Lake George Park. So those numbers, the 35 feet, they're pretty well understood by developers, by landowners, by the regulating agencies. It's very similar to what currently exists for shorelines. That's definitely on the lower side of recommended buffer widths. But we also have a different geographic situation here in Lake George Park, where we are not on the downhill side of a hog farm and looking to remove all the stormwater from that runoff. In most cases, we have stormwater controls for many of the properties in Lake George Basin. The quality of the water coming off into those corridors should be cleaner than many of the study areas we looked at in those overall research projects. As an example of will the sky fall if we install these provisions, the answer currently seems to be no. The town of Bolton currently administers this same stream buffer standard that we're proposing right now. And the town of Queensbury is more rigorous than ours by quite a bit. No vegetation removal whatsoever within 35 feet of the stream, and overall a 75-foot buffer that limits development, which is a considerably stronger standard than what the commission is looking to put in place. We have been speaking with the town supervisor and the code enforcement officer. I've been asking how this is being put in place. Have there been a lot of impacts to new developments in these areas, a lot of environmental pushback or a lot of development pushback? And they say we really haven't seen a lot of that yet. So it does seem to be working for them. Their stream standards have been in place. Their 35 feet previous standard had been in place for many years before this. So we do have at least a model to say, no, this really hasn't had a significant impact in the town of Queensbury or the town of Bolton so far. So we have good models. At the end of the day, what the commission is proposing holistically for everything I've talked about so far is actually less than what the town of Queensbury has in their current standards. So we are working towards actually meeting those standards of what one of our towns has within the Lake George watershed. And we applaud their progressive nature and working to protect their streams and Lake George itself. And we're simply hoping to come closer to that standard with our current proposals here. So I'll jump in quickly to the next steps. So we began this effort in 2017 with a lot of outreach and a lot of meetings to develop these general ideas. We're going to continue the outreach. It has been the commission's goal since day one to be as transparent as possible and meet with anybody that is interested in meeting with us, whether you support it, whether you do not support it, and talk about these ideas in great detail. We are accepting public comment until 27th of September, which gives us a good full 2 months of time for people to digest these, ask questions, and provide comments back. And then once all those comments are in, we need to respond to all those comments. If the commission decides to make a substantive change, we go through this process again. If those changes are largely ministerial or not traditionally substantive, then the commission has the opportunity to move forward and adopt these regulations later this fall. As these regulations would be adopted by the Park Commission, they would be automatically in place in every municipality around the Lake George Park, as we understand it. However, the local municipalities that are administering our regulations are going to ultimately have to get their local laws amended on their books as well. And we plan on working with them from here forward to try to make that process as smooth as possible once we settle on the final package. And we're looking for these things to be implemented largely late this year or in early 2021. So that is, I apologize for the length of that, but some of these things are a little bit complicated, and I want to make sure we try to put our best foot forward in explaining some of these. So that is what I have for you right now. I will close out of this and get it back to the chairman, whereas Bruce, it is back up to you. Thank you for the time.
Okay, Dave. We only thank you very much, Dave. That was A short presentations, considering it took 3 years to get to this point. So, well done. We have a resolution for the negative declaration for seeker, and I'm hoping that Mr. Parker is still awake and has a copy of that resolution.
I'm awake and no, I don't.
You
Can I
don't
pop
have a-
in, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. You can.
I don't know if we want to do that right now, or if the commissioners want to chat about what Dave put together and presented. The negative declaration is for stormwater. You have, the commissioners were all sent part 2 and part 3 of the full EAF. And you have to go through part 2 and answer the questions before you can adopt the resolution. So I don't know how you want to, it doesn't matter to me how you want to do this. It's completely up to you.
Well, if the procedure says it can't be adopted at this point, I'm surprised it's on the agenda. But,
No, it can be adopted. It can be adopted. The seeker negative declaration can be adopted. Before you adopt it, you have to go through part 2, and you have that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I was hoping that Carla might be able to take us through part 2 and any questions asked by the commissioners at any time. Carla has been working overtime to make sure that our legal processes are exactly where they need to be with DEC, APA, and the governor's office. She's by far the most qualified to kind of take us through this process. So, Carla, would you mind doing that for the commissioners?
I would not mind at all.
Carla,
And
this is the same attachments that you had already forwarded us, right?
yes, I sent them to you last week.
Good.
I had sent parts 1, 2, and 3, plus the coastal assessment, because Bolton is in the local waterfront. And what we need to do is, you all adopted part 1 a couple of years ago, and you declared yourselves lead agency. There were no interested or involved agencies that had an issue with the commission acting as lead agency. So if you have part 2, do you have part 2 in front of you?
I do. I printed it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, do you have it in front of you?
I don't actually have part 2 in front of me, no.
Carla, I printed
Okay.
it.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to do then. I'm not going to take nearly as long as Dave did, because my stuff is not nearly as important. But I will have to go through and ask the commission just to give me a yes, no on these questions. So I apologize for the monotony of this, but we're going to go forward. The first question is, will the proposed action involve construction on or physical alteration of the land surface of the proposed site? And what I would remind you, the commission, is that the proposed action is the adoption of the regulations. You're not adopting the regulations, but that's the action. So it's not any physical work done on any property. It's just the action of adopting the regulations. So most of these are going to be no.
Right.
Just so you know. So I guess I'm trying to figure out the easiest way to go through this. I would propose that is no. I don't know if anybody, Kathy, you have it in front of you.
I have it.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I have Kathy work with me on this? And if anybody has any other questions, we can go forward.
This is a procedural matter, and if you can handle it in the most efficient way to get rid of it, I'd be very happy.
Okay. So, all right. So number 1, we just indicated, Kathy, you indicated no. Number 2, the proposed action may result in modification or destruction of or inhibit access to any unique or unusual landforms on the site. I propose that would be a no.
Right.
Okay. Number 3, impacts on surface water. The proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other surface water bodies. I did propose yes on that because the adoption will have surface water, but that it would be a no or small impact on that. The commission feel good on that?
Yes.
Yes, and all the itemized underneath that, all the specifics, everything is checked, no or small impact may occur, where you enumerate, where they're all
Right.
enumerated.
Okay, the next one, number 4, the impact on groundwater. The proposed action may result in new or additional use of groundwater or may have the potential to introduce contaminants to groundwater. That's obviously a no, I put down, since it has the exact opposite effect. I presume that's good for everybody.
Yep.
Number 5, the impact on flooding is the proposed action may result in development on lands subject to flooding. I put no on that because the action doesn't result in the development on lands subject to flooding. If anybody has any questions on that one, we're good on that.
Yep.
And Joe Thuin, I would ask, and Dave, if either of you in your technical expertise have any comments, if you pop in as well. Number 6, the impacts on air. The proposed action may include a state regulation air emission source. I put no on that one. Impact on plants and animals. The proposed action may result in a loss of flora or fauna. Again, that was a no. Impact on agricultural resources. The proposed action may impact agricultural resources. I put a no on that. And again, just let me know if you all are in agreement on this. Impact on aesthetic resources. The land use of the proposed action are obviously different from or are in sharp contrast to current land use patterns between the proposed project and a scenic or aesthetic resource. I put no on that.
Yep.
Number 10, the impact on historic and archaeological resources. Proposed action may occur in or adjacent to historical or archaeological resources. I put no on that one because, again, the action is the adoption of the regulations. If that one I'm not wedded to, we could change that to yes if there are, because I presume there are historic archaeological resources, but the impact would be small or minor. So I'm not quite sure how the commission wants to work on number 10. So if anybody has any comments on that, it would be greatly appreciated. Or if you want to stay with no, I'm fine with that as well.
No is fine with me.
Well, Carla, when you look at all the bullets underneath it, I think
Yep.
that as I went over them, I don't think they're germane to, that we need to check anything for any kind of an impact.
And that's why, going back to what the actual action is, the adoption of a lot of these don't really work for adoptions of local laws or for regulations, but this is how you have to go through seeker. The impact on open space and recreation, number 11, is the proposed action may result in a loss of recreational opportunities or reduction of open space resources as designated in any adopted municipal open space plan. I said no on that one. We're getting there, guys. We're on page 7. Impact on CEAs. The proposed action may be located within or adjacent to a critical environmental area. I did say yes on that one, but that the impact was small or was no impact or small.
Right.
Impact on transportation. I have the proposed action may result in a change to existing transportation, and that's a no. Same with impact on energy, that it may cause an increase in the use of any form of energy. I said no on that. 15, the proposed action may result in increase in noise, odors, or outdoor lighting. Again, that was a no. Number 16, the proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants. No on that one. 17, the proposed action is not consistent with adopted land use plans. That's a no. Number 18, the proposed project is inconsistent with existing community character. Again, that's a no. So there is all of your part 2s. I know I went through them fairly quickly, but does anybody have any concerns with any of those?
Carla, I was wondering where we would fit the timber harvesting part. as far as having an impact. At first, I thought it would go under agricultural, but that's not farming. But yet
Right.
you're disrupting the soil potentially. But then I thought maybe we could put it under the number 12, the impact on a CEA, where we did say yes. So I was just wondering where that would fit, or if it does fit under any of these categories.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused on that, because remember, the action is the adoption of the law and so the adoption of the regulation. You know, we're saying that it may be within a CEA, and we did include that, but we said that it was going to have no or a small impact. Yeah, and you have to remember, the point of seeker is to make sure that you're doing as least restrictive environmental issues as you can. So I think, you know, you're looking at it as a whole. The whole regulation that's being changed would be encompassed by this. You don't have to parse it out into, you know, where does timber harvesting fit and where does retrofitting fit. It's just the whole, you look at the regulation as a whole. So I don't think there's an issue including, you know, if we wanted to talk about it during that portion, that's fine. You also remember there's a part 3 to this where we do send out the narrative and explain where everything falls in. Does that help?
It does. Thank you very much.
So is everybody, all the commissioners, are you comfortable with the way part 2 is currently set out?
Yes.
It's very thorough.
Okay, and if so, then, Mr. Chairman, what happens is there's a part 3, and what you'll do is the part 3 is incorporated into your resolution. So you should have a copy of the resolution. If the commission wants to go through part 3 is the narrative explaining that you've taken a hard look, that you've complied with seeker, and that you are willing to adopt a negative declaration for the purposes of seeker.
Mr. Parker with a finger in the air, does that mean anything in particular?
I believe that I have a copy of the resolution. I found it in my electronic files here. When you're ready.
Yeah, Carter, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that we've gone over this and everybody has, and while I didn't have a copy of this in front of me today, I have had the copy like everyone else who had a chance to look at it. If our general consensus, which we will come to with a resolution, is we can approve the negative declaration at this point. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I just, for members of the public listening and maybe getting a little antsy, this does not adopt the regulations. This is just the seeker portion of it. It gets a little confusing, but for members,
there might be more than smoke signals coming if somebody thought that this was actually approving the regulation. No, this is a standard procedure on just about any conservation type thing we take. It has even on a housing project. It's still a seeker.
Yes, and what this does, Mr. Chairman, is this allows the public actually even more transparency. We could wait and do seeker after the public comments, but in looking at this and in speaking actually with, I call him the guru of seeker over at DEC, Larry Weintraub, this is how it really procedurally should work. Because all of the seeker documents and everything now can be presented to the public, and they have all of that. So the public has absolutely everything that the commission has related to stormwater.
Thank you. I think at this point, I would just say, is there any commissioner here that feels uncomfortable on voting on the adoption or the not adoption of the seeker resolution as it's going to be read? Is anybody uncomfortable with going forward at this point? That being the case, I feel very comfortable asking Vice Chairman Parker if he would read the resolution.
Right from my telephone. Resolution, I believe it's number 2020-27. Lake George Park Commission, subject resolution determining no significant impact and issuing a negative declaration under SECRA for proposed amendments to 6 NYCRR 646-4 stormwater quotes. Whereas the Lake George Park Commission is empowered pursuant to Article 43 of the Environmental Conservation Law to preserve, protect, and enhance the unique natural and scenic resources of Lake George and to promulgate rules and regulations in furtherance of these purposes. And whereas the Commission must evaluate all proposed actions submitted to it for its consideration that may affect the environment in light of the State Environmental Quality Review Act and the regulation promulgated thereunder, and whereas by Resolution 2018-29, adopted on June 26, 2018, the Commission adopted a resolution finding the project to be a Type 1 action, as that term is defined in Section 6 NYCRR 617.2 and 617.4, and further named itself lead agency for the purposes of SECRA. And whereas no interested or involved party objected to the Commission's desire to serve and act as the lead agency for the purposes of SECRA, whereas the Commission has taken a hard look at the project and examined and completed Part 2 of the full environmental assessment form, now, therefore be it resolved by the Board of Commissioners that the proposed project will not have a significant adverse effect on the environment for the reasons set forth in the attached notice of determination of non-significance, and be it further resolved that the Executive Director, staff, and LGPC Council are authorized to take all actions reasonable and necessary to file the negative declaration and discharge the Commission's responsibility as lead agency in this action. This resolution shall take effect immediately, and I make that a motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the negative declaration for seeker on the project. Any further discussion? All in favor with a show of hands? Opposed? You got all those pictures, Michelle? As far as I can see, it was carried unanimously.
Right.
And Michelle, for your minutes, I would ask that you check with Justin to see if Mr. Nishaw was available to us by telephone or if he has to be shown as absent. I'm not sure whether he's been listening in on this or not.
Mr. Nishaw is not with us right now. He was having significant technical difficulties, and because you have a quorum, he decided not to continue the fight.
Okay, that makes it easy for Michelle. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the next, it's still under Mr. Parker's bailiwick, the Law Enforcement Committee report.
The Law Enforcement Committee met this morning, both in open session, and we went into executive session to discuss two ongoing enforcement cases. The lieutenant brought us up to date on our equipment, brought us up to date on the busyness of the lake to date this summer and some of the occurrences that have happened. And I do have a resolution right here. It is Resolution 2020-30, whereas the Law Enforcement Committee met via teleconference July 28, 2020, to review matters pertaining to the Lake George Park Commission's Marine Patrol and the Commission's law enforcement program. And whereas active law enforcement cases and their status were reviewed in executive session, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee has reported on the results of that committee meeting at this full commission meeting, and whereas the Law Enforcement Committee recommends acceptance of this month's law enforcement report, now therefore be it resolved that the commission accepts the report of the Law Enforcement Committee, and I would also make that as a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Law Enforcement Committee report. Any discussion? All in favor? I think enough of you are still awake. That looked like a show of hands. It was all in favor. Thank you. We're now to the public comments, and before we move into public comments, I would ask Michelle, would you please make sure that entered into public comments is a copy of Mr. Ron Miller's letter concerning the aircraft incident in Sandy Bay? Just a copy of the letter in the minutes.
Sure, I can do that.
Is everyone- Okay, thank you. Justin, you'll have to monitor if there's anyone from the audience who wants to make a public comment at this point. You'll have to let them.
Sure. So at this point, we have several folks from the public in attendance. And if you would like to make a comment and you are muted, please unmute yourself and I will call on you to make your comment.
Justin, before we go forward, can Carla just give us a quick going forward, what the next steps are as far as the stormwater regulations?
Sure, I can do that. So what happens now, the law requires us to have a public hearing. The public hearing cannot occur until 60 days after the publication in the state register, which was last Wednesday. So the public hearing, the earliest it could happen is the date it is happening, September 22nd. We then have to keep the public comment period open for 5 days after the public hearing. And after that, we compile all of the public comment. And as Dave said, we then go forward and respond to the public comment. There's a summary response form that we have to do. If the commission determines that any of the issues raised would result in a substantial change to the regulations, and there's a definition for that, then what we would have to do is basically start the process over again, submit the changes down to Albany, wait for Albany to review them, kick them back to us, put them in the state register, wait another 60 days, have another public hearing, and go forward like that. In the event that there is no substantive public comment that would require any changes, and they're just minor changes, ministerial changes, we have the right to do that. The commission at its October meeting would be the earliest time that the commission could adopt the resolution, adopt the regulations. The regulations would become effective once they are published again in the state register. So it's my understanding that the regulations, I believe, would be effective. I think we're looking at a January 1, 2021 date. So the commission can do its notice of adoption and set that forth in the state register. And then in January, the stormwater regulations would become adopted. I will be working with council for the municipalities that govern their own and have their own. There is a model ordinance that is up on our website. The model ordinance is what we will be working with them to accomplish and have them update their law accordingly. That's the stormwater. Stream is different. Stream corridor, we are on the same track, but we submitted those regulations, the proposed regulations, to Albany along with the SAPA documents. Albany has to review them, provide comments, and then we put them in the state register, and then it's the same process that follows. As Dave indicated, we are hoping and trying to work with Albany for an expedited review since the portion that was changed was basically reviewed already. It was the stream buffer part of stormwater. So we're hoping to move that forward. They understand we are mainly a seasonal community up here. So they understand that we're going to talk about stream corridor. We're obviously not going to release the regulations until we're permitted to. I understand that may be frustrating, but that's kind of what the law requires. Does that clarify things for you, Bill?
Yeah, well, I know it, but I
Joe?
was just kind of getting on the record.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So for public comments, like I said, members of the public, if you wish to make a comment, please unmute yourself and then I'll know that you wish to speak, and then I will call on you to speak in the order that I see you on my screen. So Rosemary, you are first.
Thank you. Rosemary Pusateri, Lake Stewardship Group of Cloverdale. I applaud that the fertilizer regs are in the stormwater management plan. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Lisa, you're up. Lisa Adamson.
Yeah, Lisa Adamson, Assembly Point Water Quality Coalition, and I want to ask a quick question and then pass if the chair of our committee also wants to speak, Bob Carbognan, maybe he could. My question is, many of us would like to see a universal septic training and inspection program mandated around the lake. And it seems that this is a watershed issue and that the Park Commission should be taking this on. In scrolling through your website, it's hard for me to know what you're working on as far as septic in a universal way. So that's sort of a comment and a question. And I don't know, Bob Carbognan, whether you want to take over on that.
Bob, go ahead if you'd like.
Yes, hi. As we know, septic systems in Assembly Point and around the lake, particularly those of the waterfront, there are systems that are failing, and that's been brought to light. Queensbury has a septic system inspection regulation upon transfer, and there's been 60% of the properties that have been inspected have found to have a system that's failing in some respect or another. And since the Lake George Park Commission encompasses obviously the entire perimeter of the lake, it would be nice to see some type of regulation to be included. That's one comment. A second one is regarding fertilizer. As we all know, there are some residents around the lake that have perfect lawns. We know they're using fertilizer. Queensbury has a law in place that prevents usage of fertilizer within a certain distance from the lakefront. However, having laws in place without having to be enforced serves no purpose. My third comment is, if, as was stated during the presentation, the Park Commission contacted Queensbury regarding the setback issue and indicated that Queensbury really hasn't had any pushback with regard to their stricter standards on setbacks. So there's been no pushback. I'm not sure why the Lake George Park Commission would adopt a lesser standard. With regards to runoff, Assembly Point Road has been a problem for many, many years. The table of the road tilts towards the lake, and there is no buffer. The road is not wide enough, or the encroachment on the lake is not substantial enough to absorb the runoff from the roadway, which is an area that is in dire need to be addressed. Any comments, please?
Mr. Chairman, I can jump in if you'd like.
Yeah, just before you do, Dave, I just want to realize you have answered this question over and over and over during the general presentation, and we don't normally respond except for clarification purposes during general comment. I'm pretty sure you're aware of that, but I know what you're about to say, and I appreciate it. Go ahead.
Okay. So I may ask Walt to chime in a second here. So just so you understand how the Lake George Park Commission works as a state agency, what we're doing right now with stormwater has taken us a minimum of 3 years, or you can go back to the inception 4 years ago. And we would have to not only draft what any septic regulation might entail, but we would have to also indicate how it's not counterproductive to other current regulations overseen by the Department of Health and DEC, local municipalities. We'd also have to identify the science specifically noting that septic systems are a defined impact on Lake George. So just a little bit of background on the fact that whereas a town can move forward in a very rapid fashion in 2 or 3 months and adopt a local law, the bar for setting a regulation at a New York State agency is arguably considerably higher, and these things take a long time. I believe the chairman had noted at least 2 or 3 years ago that there was an interest among himself and some of the commissioners once we finished what we're trying to do with stormwater and stream corridors, to take a look into the on-site wastewater field in Lake George Park. And I believe that is one of the things that we're going to take a look at next time. There are a lot of actively engaged partners and on-site systems in Lake George Park. And we haven't, as an agency, been deeply engaged in that because we've been trying to work on our invasive species program and certainly getting these 2 new regulations passed. But I understand your concerns. So towards that end, I know that Walt Lender has been working and reaching out to municipalities around Lake George Park about the septic system transfer law. And I don't know if I can impose upon Walt to say a couple of words about those efforts.
Sure. We've met with several of the municipalities over the past couple of years about advancing a similar law to that which Queensbury and Bolton and Town of Lake George, well, Town of Lake George is a little different, but so we're hoping that some of the communities will consider these and try to get something that's relatively unified around the lake. Each municipality would have to adopt its own, but similar to those that have already been adopted in some of the other towns. So we'd like to see that move forward. Also, we're working with several municipalities to take on-site wastewater systems offline and connect with municipal treatment systems, municipal sewer systems, wherever that's possible, wherever towns have the ability to extend a district to encompass several potentially failing on-site wastewater systems.
Thanks, Walt. And I know, having talked to several supervisors about this in general, there is interest municipally about adopting this. The idea of septic inspection on transfer has been around for decades. It's been on the town of Chester's books since the 1980s. So it's just getting, number one, you have to identify the issue as a defined problem facing that town for water quality of the streams in Lake George. And then you have to build that argument to a point where the public supports it. And I applaud the communities that have done that so far. I do think it's the right thing to do. It's low-hanging fruit, but these things take a little bit of time. The Park Commission right now does not have the horsepower to pull through regulations at a time, but it's something that I would believe the Commission is going to be looking at least assisting or taking the lead on at some point in the future if possible. So thank you.
That's good.
Hey, Walt, did you have any comments that you wanted to make?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention to the Park Commission that we very much appreciate that you've moved the septic, or you've moved the stormwater regs forward to another step. We appreciate that you came to us 2 or 3 years ago and did some outreach with our board so that we had a better understanding of how these regulations were going to be set up and moving forward. So no one can say ever that that the Commission didn't do its outreach on this. I know at this point, since it's been quiet for several months, like over a year, I think there's going to have to be some reminding that goes on. So you're welcome to come back to our board if you'd like to. We have some new board members. We'd also like to offer our assistance in doing outreach. So we'd like to put some information out there to the public through our channels, through our membership, to get people to gain a better understanding of these regulations as they go through the public hearing process. And also, to that end, as you know, the Lake George Association is always concerned about water quality, and we're looking for every opportunity. So I think the retrofit aspect of this especially is going to be a big opportunity for us. And we've already developed an update to the publication that we did a few years ago called the Homeowner's Guide to Lake-Friendly Living, which reflects these new regulations. And hopefully that will be a way of helping people be proactive about their own properties and not having to go through the retrofit if they already take care of those stormwater issues on their properties with rain gardens and buffers and things like that. So we're hoping to help property owners around the basin with that publication. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Walt.
All right, Kathy, I see you've got your hand up, but hold on.
Muted.
Muted.
Okay. I would like to respond to Bob's concerns about the septic inspections, but I'm a little chagrined right now to think that Walt spoke and Dave and a couple others were earlier in the meeting that we had before the official meeting was during our, you can see I'm a little upset here, that during the law enforcement meeting, I probably brought it up at an inappropriate time, but I have let these people know that I am spearheading a concerted effort to pass the property transfer law at Hewlett's Landing. And I really would like, it would have been nice for you people that have more clout than I have to have acknowledged that just now after talking about the property transfer law and things around the lake, that we are trying to do something at Hewlett's Landing. It would help me a lot to know and let the public know that you acknowledge that and you're behind me on this. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, Chris Novitsky, I've just got to unmute you here.
Thanks, Justin. And I want to thank the commission for making step forward on the stormwater regulations. And I do look forward for a good discussion on those, because I do feel it's important that we really step up and address this now. And I feel hopefully we'll do that with open minds. On the septic issue, I'm not sure if everyone out there knows, but a couple of weeks ago, the fund announced a program, a complete guide to homeowners on safe septic systems. We worked with a consultant, Kathy Swaza, who's a town engineer for Bolton. We've worked with her on the wood chip bioreactor project at the Bolton wastewater treatment plant. Very knowledgeable on wastewater treatment, help us put together this guide for homeowners, informing them on impacts that septic systems have, and they are having an impact. Our algae biomonitoring has shown that. How systems work, you know, what people can do to maintain those systems, signs of failures, and how they move forward to replace those if it's necessary, the interactions with the design professionals, things that they may need to know. So we'd be glad to talk to the commission about this. We feel it's a very comprehensive guide. There is a presentation virtually this afternoon with the Pilot Knob Association. And we are presenting up at Bluff Head for the association up in Hewlett's, north of Hewlett's. But probably the biggest part of this and the biggest stumbling block that we've heard are people's concerns, rightly so, about replacement. So we have entered into a partnership with two local lending institutions, Adirondack Trust and Glens Falls National Bank, who have stepped up to become partners with this program and offering no interest and low interest loans. So we're very excited to have that. So I encourage people to go to safesepticsystems.org to find out more information, and just like to thank you for this opportunity.
All right, at this point, I don't see anyone else who has unmuted themselves to speak. So if there's anyone else that would like to speak. Oh, hi, Ashley, go ahead.
Oh, it's Carol Collins.
Carol, okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, couple of comments. They're going to be a little mixed up, but I think we need to define what fertilizer is, because currently the fertilizers that you can buy have no phosphorus, and they'll be, you know, they contain nitrogen, but they'll be of lesser consequence. We need to reflect on what mulch, if mulch should be put into this category as well, because that does carry a high concentration of phosphorus. Has any consideration be made of that?
I'll step in here just before Dave does. The actual, we never comment and get into a discussion period during all the comments, but to answer your question, specifics on the law, yes, we will investigate. There will be a much more explicit explanation or description, so to speak, of fertilizers than just the general terminology of the word fertilizer when the regulations go.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I have another comment, and I guess I can't get an explanation, but I'll just make the comment.
Sure.
I like the idea that we want to become stormwater neutral, but it's not possible with these current regulations because it's only requiring the retrofit to be 20% of what is actually needed. So we need to think about what that stormwater neutral was actually going to mean, because we haven't raised the bar to the point where we could reach that. I like the idea, of course, about the stormwater, the stream setback. Actually, that regulation has been in place for quite some time under the Adirondack Park Agency. Is it possible that we could change those words a bit? And the definition is usually where we can accomplish these tasks, so that we get that buffer at the lake shore as well. And you can respond or not.
The lake is the body of water, just as the streams are. Any regulation for this, they did correct me on this, but any regulation that relates to the stream corridors or to stormwater runoff is, the lake is a body of water just as any stream is. So it would be affect the lake as well as a stream.
Okay, then we really need to focus on that in the definition, because a lot of this.
Well, have you read the regulations as they're proposed?
Many times. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see. We can get into details. And the other thing is, it's a minor point. It had to do with your seeker review, because when you do infiltrate all this stormwater, you are putting pollutants into the groundwater. So I'm not a seeker expert, but Carla, I do want to bring that up, because when you do introduce a lot of these pollutants from stormwater into the groundwater, not all of them are bound to the soils. So, or not all of them are chemically reactive to the soil. So there is contamination that does occur with stormwater, and that's a bigger issue, but it's might be important in the seeker process. And I think that's it. Congratulations, guys. Did a great job.
Thank
and
you.
Kathy.
Any more public comments, Justin?
Let's see. Is there anybody else that would like to make a comment? If so, go ahead and unmute yourself. It does not appear so.
We're done with public comments then, and I'm looking for somebody to make a suggestion as to the next resolution. I see Joe's hands up.
I move to adjourn.
Do I have a second? I see Ken Parker is seconded. We're going to move to adjourn, and it's seconded, and all in favor, show of hands. That's as good as waving goodbye. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for another mission. Thank you.
Thank you.